This was a truly horrific incident and a tragic loss of life. The jury to the inquest into these deaths returned their findings of unlawful killings yesterday afternoon, and our thoughts and prayers once again go out to the families and friends of the victims, and indeed to the whole community in Keyham. I would like to pay particular tribute to the Honourable Member for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport for his tireless campaigning on behalf of the Keyham community and the families since this tragedy took place. It is anticipated that the coroner will be issuing a prevention of future death reports very, very shortly, in which further recommendations are likely to be made. If, as expected, the Home Office receives such a report, we will be responding to that, along with the recommendations made by the Independent Office for Police Conduct, who have conducted an investigation into these shootings, and a separate inquiry by the Scottish Affairs Committee, substantively within 60 days of receiving that Prevention of Future Deaths report. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government keeps firearms licensing under review to safeguard against abuse and prevent risk to public safety. In the immediate aftermath of these shootings in Plymouth, the then Home Secretary asked all police forces to urgently review their firearms licensing practices. The review found that, collectively, a total of 6,434 firearms and shotgun licences were surrendered, seized, revoked or refused over the previous 12-month period across England, Wales and Scotland. Of these, a total of 908 were subsequently returned or reissued following further checks or appeals decided by the courts. As a result of the review of returned licences, in 8 cases, the original decision was overturned and the licences have been resurrendered or revoked. I hope these findings provide reassurance that the police have put in place robust processes for issuing and reviewing firearms and shotgun licences. But that does not mean there is any complacency, Madam Deputy Speaker, following these awful events. Subsequently, there were strengthened controls issued through statutory guidance in October 2021, a few months after this awful incident, to make sure the police must ensure people are medically fit to receive a licence and that full medical checks have been undertaken, something which did not happen, of course, in this case. A new digital marker system to flag firearms owners to GPs is also currently being introduced. The statutory guidance draws on previous lessons learned and will ensure better consistency across police and firearms licensing departments. It will mean that no one, or it means already, that no one will be given a firearms licence unless their doctor has expressly confirmed to the police whether or not they have any relevant medical conditions, including in relation to their mental health. The statutory guidance makes it clear that police can undertake a wide range of checks now to assess a person's suitability depending on the individual case, including social media checks, financial checks, interviews, background checks with relatives or associates, and checks relating to domestic violence or with public protection units. The College of Policing has also refreshed its authorised professional practice on firearms licensing. A consultation was launched about a month ago on the 12th of January. It will conclude on the 10th of March, and I would encourage members to respond to that consultation. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Services has also announced it will be undertaking a thematic review of all forces arrangements in respect of firearms licensing in the year 24-25. Now, in relation to Devon and Cornwall, they have assured the IOPC that changes have been made following the IOPC's recent recommendations. But depending on what the coroner might recommend shortly, I am currently minded to ask the Inspectorate to go and look specifically at the arrangements that Devon and Cornwall have in place for firearms licensing to confirm their suitability. The Home Office is also currently taking forward a review of fees that can be charged for firearms licences or certificates by police forces, and we expect to be consulting later this year. That's to make sure that forces have enough resources to conduct these very important checks. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must ensure our controls on firearms are as robust as possible and learn the lessons from the tragic deaths in Keyham and also in Scotland. And we therefore await the coroner's anticipated report into the prevention of future deaths with keen interest. And as I have said, we will respond to the expected coroner's report on preventing future deaths and the recent report by the Scottish Affairs Committee following the shootings in Skye and the IOPC report within 60 days of receiving the last of those 3 reports, which is going to be the coroner's report, and we will respond substantively to the recommendations in all 3 reports. I commit today that any further changes needed to protect the public will be made, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement. Today we mourn Sophie Martin, who was only 3, Lee Martin, Stephen Washington, Kate Shepherd and Maxine Davidson. I also want to pay tribute to my honourable friend for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport for his work. I know that he has been affected very deeply, as has his community. The jurors' conclusions are searing. The IOPC report is damning. Catastrophic failure at Devon and Cornwall Police, in the individual decisions that were taken, in the appalling lack of supervision, training and oversight, and in the rules themselves. There is no automatic right to bear arms in this country. There is no right to be given the benefit of the doubt. After Dunblane, firearms units were to be given as much training and guidance as possible, and yet Devon and Cornwall Police had no formal training for 2 decades. The firearms licensing supervisor told the court he'd done a 2-day training course in 1998, but nothing else until 2020. How could it possibly be that the person in charge of deciding whether someone was safe with a gun hasn't even been trained on how to use the risk manual? This casual approach to risk was dangerous and proved to be fatally flawed. The last HMIC inspection on firearms was 8 years ago in 2015. I'm glad that the Minister has told us today that the next one will be completed in 24-25, but I do ask why we need to wait a year and whether this can be brought forward. The 2015 inspection raised concerns that police force practice on licensing was inconsistent, but the public consultation on statutory guidance only started in 2019. The government failed to respond to the consultation. Luke Davidson used his licensing weapon to kill 5 people in 2021. Madam Deputy Speaker, Devon and Cornwall now reject 6% of gun applications since the Keyham shooting, but the national average across England is only 3%. It is frankly terrifying to think that other pump-action shotguns could be in the wrong hands. Jake Davison's childhood and teenage history should have triggered far more questions and expert advice. There was information about him that was never revealed. The mental health marker is finally being introduced, but it is within the statutory guidance, not a legal duty, and experts have raised concerns about the new system. Is the Minister aware of those concerns, and is he satisfied with the new markers? What are the government's plans to make sure there is a proactive approach to risk management on firearms licensing? And how will the Minister ensure that statutory guidance is followed by police forces and that forces are held to account for it? Madam Deputy Speaker, Jake Davison was an incel. The online radicalisation of young men has been overlooked for far too long. In the last year, there were 77 referrals to prevent for incel and 154 referrals for potentially planning or thinking about a school massacre. If people are referred to prevent, can the Minister explain if there is a flag on prevent systems to notify the police if they have a gun licence? I would like to hear from the Minister what action his government is taking to tackle misogynist extremism, because his government watering down the online safety bill means misogynists and incel gangs will continue to proliferate online. The current counter-extremism strategy is 8 years out of date. Can the Minister tell us when the government will update the strategy? Can the Minister tell the House why he does not accept the IOPC's recommendations in full. I understand he's waiting 60 days for other pieces of work to be concluded, but I think he could accept the IOPC's very sensible recommendations in full today. The new Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall Police has called for legislation on firearms licensing. Does the Minister agree? We are alert to concerns about pump-action shotguns in homes. What is the Home Office view on that? Labour in government will initiate a review of gun licensing laws. We must learn the lessons so that what happened in Keyham can never happen again. Nothing else will do.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Shadow Minister for her comments and her questions. I'll try and answer as many as I can here, but I'm sure we'll discuss this again in the future. On the question of the HMI CFRS thematic inspection, that is programmed as I set out, but the point I made about Devon and Cornwall specifically is something subject to the coroner's recommendations that I will be asking them to do a lot sooner, essentially, if they're willing to do it immediately, to make sure that the assurances they've given to the IOPC that Devon and Cornwall have implemented already all of the recommendations, have indeed been done. I think that is something that does need to happen essentially straight away, and subject to the coroner's report, what that may have to say about it, I'll be writing to HMI CFRS on that basis very, very shortly. In relation to concerns about the new markers being placed on files, ensuring there is a proactive approach to risk management and indeed the need for legislation in this area, those are all topics that I can commit will be addressed in our response to these three reports. I think it's important to respond to all three together rather than piecemeal, and I don't think 60 days is too long to wait for that. I've been very clear with colleagues that is what we need to do, respond substantively within 60 days of that coroner's report, which is itself expected very, very shortly indeed. I completely agree with the Shadow Minister's point that people with Davison's background should not receive firearms licences. Indeed, under the rules in place at the time, he should not have received a firearms licence, and the IOPC, in their recent report, identified, I think, 2 or 3 individuals within the Devon and Cornwall force who the IOPC considered guilty of misconduct by wrongly authorising the issue of that licence, which Davison, as I say, should never have received, even under the regulations as they stood, both in 2018 and in 2020. In relation to the question about radicalisation, I think if someone has been referred into Prevent and there's any substantive evidence of radicalisation, it is reasonable that should be known to the police in making decisions about firearms licences, and I will undertake to confirm that is the case, and if it's not the case, to see what steps can be taken to make sure there is a link between the Prevent database and checks performed by firearms officers. Madam Deputy Speaker, there's a lot of material to cover. I think the substantive response the government's going to bring forward in approximately 2 months' time, I think will answer all of the questions and more, and no doubt there will be a statement to the House on the occasion of presenting that.
Kit Malthurst.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. Can I welcome the Minister's suggestion that the BNIOPC investigation of Devon and Cornwall's operation of firearms regulations? I think I'm right in saying they have the largest number of licences within their territory. So if they're not getting it right, then we need some reassurance that they are. And can I also welcome the fact that he underlined that even under the existing regulations, this particular person should not have received his firearms back, and it was a misapplication, if you like, of those regulations that resulted in the situation that we find ourselves in. Having said that, I'm sure the Minister would accept, and he will have had the same experience that I did, that firearms legislation is in fact an accretion of policies over the years and has become a bit of a thicket for us all to navigate, and that we should have a look at some kind of review overall. But in particular, the critical role that the medical profession will now play in general community safety. And what more does the Minister think we can do to impress upon that profession the duty they have, not just to the community more widely, but to the wider body of those who do shoot, and do operate firearms for work purposes or indeed leisure purposes, and not to stand in the way of that process. We often found medics who would refuse to issue certification for people, or would charge excessive fees for certification, and therefore not fully participating in the system. Given that this case proves the crucial nature of their assessment to all of our safety, what more does the Minister think we can do to impress that upon the medical profession?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. I know when he was in this role, he met with the families of the victims. I completely agree with his points about the medical profession. I would echo his call for the medical profession to be proactive when they're approached by the police in relation to firearms licences, to make full disclosures in consultation, of course, with their patients, and also where they see a flag that is of concern to them, to proactively contact the police. As this tragic case shows, there can be devastating consequences for the public where somebody that should not have a gun has one. And I think there is an ethical duty and a moral duty on the medical profession, which they owe to society as a whole, as well as to their patient as an individual. And I would strongly urge GPs and other medical professionals to keep that wider moral duty firmly in mind and to cooperate with the police on these issues.
Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm angry and our community is angry. We're still hurting and grieving for those that we lost, but also feeling for those who were shot and survived. Confidence in Devon and Cornwall Police has been badly shaken by the catalogue of catastrophic failures that led up to this tragedy. We've been failed locally by our police, but nationally we're also being failed by gun laws that need to be brought up to date. The families of the victims and those who survived want to see changes. A review of gun laws to bring them up to date, to make them 21st century. An urgent review of gun licensing, which has failed us so badly, not just in Devon and Cornwall, but for every other gun licensing authority everywhere else in the country. A ban on keeping pump-action weapons in someone's home, with exceptions for farmers and pest controllers. And a national incel strategy to deal with this growing toxic problem. Training for firearms officers nationwide, and importantly, full cost recovery so the police have the resources to process applications properly. So I can ask the Minister if he'll agree to meet with me and the families so they can impress upon him the strength of their loss, but also the strength of the determination in Plymouth to make sure that there will be comprehensive changes to our gun laws to make sure that no other community anywhere in the country will have to go through what we have in Plymouth.
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question, and I will, of course, meet with the families of the victims and the honourable member, as I think my predecessor has done, to listen to their concerns directly and make sure that their voice is heard in government. He raised a number of points in his question. As I said to the Shadow Minister, the response we intend to produce very shortly should address those points that he outlined. Clearly, the family may have other points they would like to add to those that we can take into account. So I would suggest we have that meeting in the next month or so that their views can feed into the comprehensive response that I've described. On the specific question of fees that he mentioned, to ensure that there is full cost recovery and police forces get the money that it costs them to run these licensing arrangements, that is something we do intend to consult on over the summer or early autumn to make sure that happens as quickly as possible. So I can make that commitment now.
Sir Gary Streeter.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I make my own tribute to the Honourable Member for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport, who has done outstanding work on this issue since this appalling event in 2021. Can I thank the Minister for his statement and for the support the Home Office has given actually to the people of Plymouth in the aftermath of this tragedy. And can I welcome the review that he's talked about today, but can I ask him not to close his mind to a thorough review of the law in relation to firearms, because I think I take the point that it's quite ancient, some of it, and it needs to be brought together and looked at in the light of internet influences as well as medical conditions. But can I finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you for being kind to me, can I say that has the Minister seen in relation to wider cultural issues the excellent report produced by the Commission of Violence Against Women and Girls by the Plymouth Commission, which tries to tackle from the bottom up some of these cultural issues. Has he seen it, and can he commend the Plymouth City Council for continuing to take that work forward?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, look, I'd like to echo my right honourable friend's tribute to the families of the victims, who have shown, I think, extraordinary bravery in the way they've handled this situation and advocated for change in what have been for them obviously very difficult circumstances. Yes, we will obviously consider recommendations for any changes to the law that may follow from these 3 reports that we're going to be considering. On the question about VORG, yes, I am aware of excellent work led by Plymouth City Councillor Rebecca Smith on a VORG strategy designed to combat these kind of issues. I know my honourable friend, the member for Louth and Horncastle, when she was Safeguarding Minister, visited Plymouth together with Councillor Rebecca Smith to discuss her excellent report. And I would actually commend the approach that Councillor Smith has developed in Plymouth to other local authorities around the country.
Lord Russell Moyle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And my thoughts, of course, are with the families and the victims, and the sterling work, of course, that my honourable friend has done on this. I wrote to his predecessor in 2020 asking for medical markers to be put on the records, for there to be a review of the fees that both GPs were charging, but that police forces were able to charge. And work then, the correspondence back was that work was being done on it. But clearly work was not done on it quick enough. And so I think what is important is not just the 60 days in which the Minister will respond, but some indication of a timetable of implementation for some of these changes, and particularly for a statutory footing for that medical marker, because I am worried, without it being statutory and without it being part of the NHS contract for GPs to have to report it, I am worried that it will be a weak enforcement.
Minister.
Thank you. Well, obviously I can't speak for my predecessor, but what I can say is that a number of steps have happened. To the point about urgency, a number of steps have been taken already. The updated authorised professional practice guidance from the College of Policing is out for consultation now. It started in January. It'll close in March. Updated statutory guidance was issued in October 2021, ensuring that there must be medical checks in every single case. On the medical marker point that he raised, medical markers are, as we speak, being fully rolled out, so that is in hand. And on the question of fees, as I said, I can commit to a consultation over the summer or early autumn on those fees, with the objective in mind of ensuring full cost recovery. In relation to the response to the recommendations, I think 60 days following the coroner's report is a good timetable for response. That will obviously contain a proposed implementation timetable, but the honourable member and others can be assured that I want to get any changes needed, and I'm sure there will be changes, implemented as a matter of urgency for obvious reasons.
Elaine Saxby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I ask my right honourable friend, as he looks to review the licensing arrangements for Devon and Cornwall Police, that it accurately reflects the vast rural area that this force actually covers? We've already heard that it does have a high level of gun ownership linked to those remote farms that do require them for work. But there is a concern that actually there's already a backlog in the renewal system, and that the rurality is not adequately reflected in the resources that the force receives.
Minister.
Okay, well, thank my honourable friend for her question. Obviously, Devon and Cornwall is a large geographic area. I understand that there are now more resources being deployed by Devon and Cornwall Police into firearms licensing, partly following this awful incident, but partly because there are quite large backlogs in Devon and Cornwall specifically for firearms licensing. So there are more resources being deployed for this purpose. But I would say, notwithstanding the reality of Devon and Cornwall, or indeed many other parts of the country, we can't obviously have different or lower standards. I know that wasn't what the Honourable Lady was suggesting. We do need to make sure the standards are high everywhere across the country. In relation to the resource question more generally, there is an intention to consult shortly on the police funding formula, and one of the inputs into that will be rurality. to make sure that adequate resources are given to more rural forces to reflect the additional costs that they very often face.
Richard Ford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the inquest concluded that the shootings in Plymouth resulted from a catastrophic failure. The responsibility lies entirely with the murderer, and I don't want to repeat his name. But the Firearms Licensing Department wasn't given the resources that it needed, and the Police and Crime Commissioner in Devon and Cornwall has admitted as much and said, I've made significant funding available to improve the Devon and Cornwall Police's Firearms Licensing Department. This, obviously, since the inquest. Madam Deputy Speaker, what conversations has the Minister had with the Police and Crime Commissioner in Devon and Cornwall about these findings, and what additional changes would he like to see in the oversight of Devon and Cornwall Police?
Minister.
Thank you. Well, look, I've had extensive discussions both inside the Home Office and with policing, including PCCs, on the question of firearms licensing. As I said in answer to the previous question, extra resources inside Devon and Cornwall have been dedicated now, following this awful incident, to the question of firearms licensing, and of course police forces up and down the country will, by the end of next month, have record numbers of police officers. In terms of changes to practice, I would like to receive the third of those three reports, the first being the Scottish Affairs Committee report, the second being the IOPC report, the third being the anticipated Coroner's Prevention of Future Deaths report, and respond to their recommendations in the round within 60 days, as I've committed already. I would expect there to be a number of changes proposed in those, responding to those recommendations, applying not just to Devon and Cornwall, but also to policing more widely. As I also said earlier, the IOPC have already made specific recommendations directed at Devon and Cornwall. Devon and Cornwall Police have assured the IOPC those proposed changes have been implemented, but I am minded to ask HMIC to specifically check up on that shortly.
Sherilyn McCrory.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I pay tribute to the whole community of Keyham, and particularly to the Honourable Member for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport for his work on this since it happened. There are 3 Cornish MPs in the chamber today, but I know I speak for all 6 of us, and actually everybody west of the Tamar, and he will know that we stand shoulder to shoulder with his community throughout this ordeal and going forward. It was good to see the Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall Police, although recently appointed, Will Kerr, apologise for the force's failings and to take accountability for what has happened, and has called for legislation on this. I would echo what everybody has said about the medical markers and for making sure we have the right balance for legislation. But is there an opportunity to consider a national unit to standardise licensing and processing and the decision making to help the resource for the local police forces?
Yeah. Well, I thank my honourable friend for her question. I think nationally consistent standards are extremely important. We need to make sure that standards are equally high across the entire country. That is part of the reason why the College of Policing are currently consulting on updated authorised professional practice to make sure those standards are clear. And if further changes are necessary, they will obviously be introduced. I think the other point that's very important is to make sure the College of Policing also introduce essentially standardised training, and that is obviously also in hand. It's a point I think that the Shadow Minister referred to in her questions earlier, to make sure that everybody up and down the country has received proper training. That was clearly a failing in Devon and Cornwall. We need to make sure that doesn't happen again anywhere.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today will be a difficult day for the community in Keyham, and my thoughts are with them, but I'm not reassured around the government's response, particularly around mental health, but also for victims of domestic violence and their former partners. I've got a constituent right now who is in hiding because her former partner has had his firearms returned to him. So what reassurance can he give to ensure that this incident will be the last, and that my constituent will also be safe?
Minister.
Yeah. Well, I think everyone's constituents, including the Honourable Ladies, are entitled to feel safe. As the Shadow Minister said, firearms licences are not a right. It's important we think very, very carefully before issuing anyone with such a licence. As I said before, we will be responding comprehensively to the recommendations in these 3 reports. I'm sure that will include, I know that will include, consideration of issues to do with domestic abuse and domestic violence, which are clearly indicators of substantially increased risk. And I'd be very happy to discuss those recommendations with her, and indeed her constituent, if she would like, as soon as they come out.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Is it correct, as I think has been reported, that in this tragic case, the murderer's mother appealed to the police to have the returned firearm removed from him and was ignored? If that is true, isn't it also the case that no change in any licensing system will be able to compensate for that level of bungling incompetence?
Well, I'm afraid to say very bad decisions, in fact wrong decisions, were made in this case. And as the former police minister, my right honourable friend, the member for North West Hampshire, said, under the guidance in force at the time, both in, I think, 2018 when the licence was first granted and 2 or 3 years later when the gun was confiscated and then returned, under the guidance in force at the time, those decisions were wrongly taken. And the IOPC has said that very clearly, and they've said that there were 2 or 3 employees or officers of Devon and Cornwall Police who made the wrong decision at the time. So he's right to say a change of guidance wouldn't have helped because the wrong decisions were made under the guidance at the time. However, we do need to make sure that the guidance is robust, it's comprehensive, training is comprehensive, and it is exactly with those purposes in mind that we're going to be responding to the 3 reports in 60 days or so.